What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Arrival Entertainment. So Scream 5 has had a full week in theaters to make a bunch of money. A lot of people are seeing it, and now it's time for me to do a ranking video of the entire series. I decided to wait a little bit of time to do this video because I wanted more people to have a chance to see the movie, because I'm going to be going into some spoilers with this video, and that includes Scream 5. So that's your spoiler warning right up front. If you haven't seen the Scream movies or the newest Scream movie, then I wouldn't recommend watching this until after you watch the movie. But if you don't care about spoilers, or if you have seen Scream 5, then feel free to stick around. And also, just like with every single list, just keep in mind that this is my personal ranking. Your ranking might be different than mine. That's totally fine. At the end of the video, let me know in the comment section how you would rank the Scream series. And also, I'm just going to be ranking the movies. I'm not going to be talking about the Scream TV series, mainly because I haven't seen the Scream TV series and I really don't have an interest in it. I've heard a lot of mixed things about it. Maybe I'll watch it one day in the future, but as of right now, I don't have any interest in seeing it, so this is just going to be a ranking of the films. So with that being said, let's get started with the list. Now, the Scream movies for me is an interesting series for me to rank, because I find enjoyment in all of these movies, whether it's a big amount of enjoyment or just a little bit amount of enjoyment. I find something to enjoy whenever I watch all these movies. However, I have to come out of this with some sort of ranking, and it's generally consistent that most Scream fans view Scream 3 as the weakest one in the series. And yeah, it's my least favorite as well. And it really does cement that looking back at the behind the scenes issues that this movie went through. There was a lot of stuff behind the scenes that really impacted how this film was made. The first one is that Kevin Williamson did not write this movie. They brought in a new writer who feels like they didn't quite understand the Scream series or these characters from the previous movies. And that's a little unfortunate, because while Kevin Williamson's writing in other projects has been somewhat mixed on some results, he did understand the Scream series. And that's because he wrote the first two. He was involved with bringing the Scream series to life. So the writing in this movie does feel a bit off compared to the first two films. And the script went through a lot of changes as well. For instance, one of them was that Stu Macher was supposed to come back and be the main killer in this one. I don't know how true that is. It's something that I heard, so I can't really say it's 100% true, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is true or not. And on top of the killer that we did get at the end of the movie, there was supposed to be a second killer, and that evidence is sprinkled all throughout the film, but then they changed it at the last minute, so it's very odd when you look at the movie and see that Ghostface is in one part of the movie and then he's magically in another part of the movie. He has like some sort of teleportation powers or something like that. It makes sense when you find out that there were supposed to be two killers in this film, but doesn't make sense when you see the end of the film and there's only one killer. And I do have a little bit of an issue with the killer. Having the killer be Roman, the director of Stab 3 in this film, and having him be Sidney's brother. I don't know if it's stepbrother or whatever, but nevertheless, he's her brother, and that he was involved with everything that's happened to Sidney since the first Scream movie. I don't really buy into that. I get that this film is mocking trilogies, and there's rules of a trilogy from a cameo from Randy from Scream 2, and so they're playing on that, but at the same time, their explanation for having everything come full circle in this film since the first movie, it just doesn't quite work. It feels like a huge stretch, and they were just trying to come up with some sort of answers when those answers, like I said, don't really quite work. And maybe it could have worked if these characters were likable in this film, which I don't like these characters in this film. These characters are just forgettable for me. I don't even remember their names. There might be a few moments here and there that I enjoy with the characters, but yeah, these are some of the weakest characters in the entire series. Even the kills in this movie feel like a huge downgrade over the first two films. The first two films were very violent and very bloody, and this one almost feels PG-13-like in a sense. This film was made after Columbine happened, and after Columbine happened, there was a lot of people pointing fingers at the media. You know, it's violent movies and video games that's causing all of this. And so Scream 3, unfortunately, got butchered in editing and had to be sanitized, so to speak, so it wouldn't offend anyone after that tragedy happened. Which is unfortunate because, like I said, the first two films were very violent and very bloody because they're horror slasher movies. And so when you have a horror slasher movie get very sanitized like this, almost PG-13 like, it is a bit of a downgrade, unfortunately. I don't hate Scream 3, I know there's a lot of people that do, but I can honestly watch this movie and be perfectly fine with it. It's just that after learning of some of the behind the scenes stuff and see how evidence of certain things are scattered throughout the film, it does sour the experience a little bit. But with that being said, like I said, I do enjoy watching it. There's moments that I enjoy. It's just definitely the weakest one in the series for me. So from here on out, I really like and love all the other entries in this series, and we're starting with Scream 4. I have such a fun time whenever I watch Scream 4. It feels like it's going back to basics after the messiness that was Scream 3, so to speak. This film is of course commenting on horror remakes and that this new Ghostface killer is remaking, so to speak, the original Woodsboro murders, which I thought was a pretty clever idea because back in the early 2000s and even still in the 2010s, horror remakes were still very much a thing, and we were getting some pretty crappy horror remakes. So the fact that this movie is commenting on horror remakes, I thought was a pretty clever direction. And we have much better characters this time around. They all work great off of each other. They're all entertaining and fleshed out pretty well for the most part. You know, with Robbie and Charlie kind of like being the new Randy, so to speak. And Kirby being my absolute favorite of the new characters. She just has so much likability to her character. Jill is related to Sydney in this movie, so there's that little bit of family dynamic when Sydney does come back to Woodsboro. And the characters in this movie are just so much better handled than they were in Scream 3. The kills in this movie are back to being very violent and very bloody, a breath of fresh air after the previous film. It's good to see Dewey and Gail back interacting with Sydney. This movie for me just does a lot right. However, something that always bothers me in this movie is how the film looks. I've heard this was intentional, but I just can't get over how horrible the movie looks overall. The movie looks like it was, number one, oversaturated, and number two, it's like the camera lens had a big smear on it the entire time and no one bothered to wipe it off. It's hard to explain. I'll put in a screenshot right here, but that's the best way I can put it. It looks oversaturated and looks like there's a giant smear on the camera lens. And like I said, I've heard that was intentional. I just don't know why they decided to go with it. It kind of sours the experience just a little bit when watching this film. But because of the likable characters and the creative and violent kills, thankfully there is a lot of enjoyment when watching Scream 4. When it comes to the killer reveal, with the killer being Jill and Charlie, I kind of like that killer reveal, even though Charlie, when it comes to Charlie, he's probably the weakest of the Ghostface killers. Well, actually, no, Roman is, but he's down there. I don't consider Charlie to be a memorable killer, mainly because when Jill goes about her plan, it's revealed that Charlie was just a pawn in Jill's plan. She's the mastermind behind these killings. So unfortunately, Charlie is a little bit of a weak killer, even though he does do most of the heavy lifting in this film. But I've grown to really appreciate Jill as the character. When I first saw it, I didn't know what to think of it. I just kind of said to myself, yeah, okay, that's whatever. But looking back on it and seeing how she planned everything out and how her plan almost flawlessly worked, I really gotta appreciate her as the killer for that. And I like the fact that they took the abandoned idea for the second killer in Scream 3 and used that motivation for that for the killer in this movie. The fact that Jill wanted to gain Sydney's fame and how she was sick and tired of living in her shadow. And there's good commentary on how people don't really get famous anymore from hard work and talent. You just have to have bad stuff happen to you on the internet and boom, you're famous, which is very true nowadays, and I like how the film commented on that. It's the more I think about Jill as the character and as the killer, the more I like her as the killer. So my only downside for Scream 4 is unfortunately how it looks. It looks terrible, but it is better written than Scream 3. It's got better characters and much better kills and a much better killer reveal. Also, the hospital scene at the end is a little bit dragged on a bit too much. I don't know if that was tacked on at the last minute when filming. It feels very tacked on, but I could do without that scene. If they could have wrapped it up at the house, it probably would have been a lot better. But overall, I think Scream 4 is a pretty underrated horror sequel. Despite Scream 2 getting rushed into production after the huge success of the first movie, and how it premiered in theaters not even a full year after the first film was in theaters, I'm genuinely surprised on how much Scream 2 really does work for me. As is, this is a horror sequel. The first film commented on horror films in general. Scream 2 focuses on horror sequels, which was a good direction to take. The killer in the movie even has a line that says, "Don't you know history repeats itself?" And the fact that the first couple kills in this movie, their names are sort of related to victims in the first film. Dewey even says that someone's trying to copycat the original Woodsboro murders, even though that idea is kind of dropped off soon after that. That was a clever idea to take. It's great to see Sidney, Dewey, Gale, and even Randy back from the previous film. They work really well with the new characters. The new characters are pretty good. They're not amazing or anything. I like Mickey, I like the boyfriend Derek, and I like Sidney's roommate. However, the other side characters, they're just kind of throwaway characters, so to speak. But they do work well off of the original characters. And there's so many good sequences in this movie. The opening at the movie theater where the first two teenagers are killed that starts off these events, very well filmed, very suspenseful, very tense. The car chase in the middle of the movie that starts the third act, very great sequence if you ask me. And then of course the third act taking place at like the school theater, I thought that was pretty cool. And I do like the killer reveals in this movie too. The killer reveal being Mickey, one of Sidney's students, and Billy Loomis's mother, which I know some fans kind of said, I don't know about that, but having her motivations just being plain old revenge for the death of her son, I think it worked for the most part. I do really like Mickey as the character, though. He's very entertaining throughout the movie, and his motivation at the end for being the killer on how he's gonna blame the movies and, kind of commenting back on people blaming the media for violent acts and stuff like that. The fact that he had all of that planned out and how he was 90% positive that he was going to get away with it because of that motivation. But Mrs. Loomis doesn't really care about that motivation. Mickey was just a pawn in her scheme. So it's a little disappointing that Mickey, once he was revealed, he just died. I mean, he did have that jump scare at the end, but I would have wished he would have gotten a little bit more screen time as the killer at the very end, like Mrs. Loomis did. Scream 2 is a movie for me that I never understood why people disliked as much as they did. I think it's a genuinely underappreciated sequel in the Scream franchise. Yeah, there's some kind of crappy moments in the movie. The main one being Derek singing to Sidney at lunch in the college. But there's a lot of great moments in this movie that I think overshadow those crappy moments. If you haven't seen Scream 2 in a while, definitely check it out. I don't think it's as bad as most people say it is. Yes, my runner-up is the new film Scream 5, and I know it's a kind of cliche thing in this situation when a new film in a franchise comes along and, people put it as their second favorite in said franchise, but I did a lot of thinking about Scream 5 over this past week. I saw the film again, and the more I think about it, the more I genuinely really, really like this new entry. Like I said in my original review, this movie had a lot to prove. There was a lot that could have gone wrong with this one. It's the first film not directed by Wes Craven because he passed away. It's not written by Kevin Williamson. So it's basically new voices coming along. It's got new characters as well. The original trio, they're not in the movie as much as the trailers might have you believe. So again, and it's coming out in January. So this film had a lot to prove, and it overcame a lot of that, most of it if you ask me. I love these new characters, and I'm hoping the surviving ones come back for the next one, if they do another one, because box office wise this movie's doing very well, so it's a possibility we might get a Scream 6. If we do, I want these surviving characters to come back. Sidney, Gale, Dewey, like I said, they're not in the movie as much as the trailers might have you believe, but they're fantastic in this movie, just like always. And Ghostface is so brutal in this movie, probably the most brutal he's been since the original film. And I do like that this movie comments a lot on requels, so to speak, sequels to the original film, but it's rebooting the franchise as well, and toxic fandom being a heavy set commentary at the end of this film once we get the killer reveal. I know there's fans that have expressed disappointments with the killer reveals in this movie, and there's even fans out there that said they predicted who the killer was going to be the second they popped up on screen. That's fine if you did. I don't know what else to say besides I didn't know who to suspect it was going to be the killer, so it did catch me off guard that Amber was the killer, and then Richie, the boyfriend, was the killer in the film as well. And looking back on it, yeah, there's clues throughout the movie that they are the killers, But like I said, I didn't see it coming the first time. And I really like that their motivation is just being toxic fans. They hated how the last Stab movie went and the previous ones, so they're taking back their franchise. You know, toxic fans are such a popular thing nowadays. You know, if a new entry in a certain franchise doesn't live up to your expectations in even the slightest way, then it's the worst movie of all time. It's the worst in the entire franchise, and people harass the filmmakers and actors on social media. Like, that's a very real thing with fandoms nowadays. And with this film commenting on that and using that to their advantage, I thought was pretty cool, because I didn't know what this film was going to comment on, because the first one, again, comments on horror films, the second one comments on sequels, the third one on trilogies, the fourth one on remakes. It's like, what do you do with it now? Requels? Yeah, they did that, but also toxic fans. And this movie, just for me, was just way better than it had any right to be, with it being a January horror movie. And hopefully, with this film being a success, we can get better horror movies in January. That's a long stretch, because, like I said in my original review, horror movies in January are like 95% always going to be crap, but I don't know, maybe with this film being a success, that might change in the future. But I really like the new Scream movie, and I can't wait to watch it again when it comes out on Blu-ray. But the best one in the franchise is still the original Scream movie, and whenever I watch the original Scream movie, I'm just surprised on how much all of this was able to reignite interest in horror movies and slasher movies. Because in the early and mid-90s, horror movies and slasher movies were in a very bad place. There was a lot of bad entries to classic franchises, and Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, being the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, and that kind of put an end to horror for a while. But then Scream came along and just injected new life into it. And man, it's impressive when you watch this film. Yeah, the film is very 90s, and some people might even say that's a little bit dated, but I think that has a charm on this movie. Whenever I watch this film, I don't look at it and say, that's too 90s for me, or that's dated. I look at it and say, yeah, that's a time period in horror captured on film, the early 90s, or the mid-90s. The movie is very violent as well. The movie was originally supposed to get an NC-17 rating, but then got cut down a bunch of times and finally got an R rating. It's just a little tidbit of information that I've always enjoyed about this film. And these are still the best characters in the franchise. Of course, Sidney, Dewey, Gale, I mean, there's a reason they've appeared in every Scream movie since. But Billy Loomis, Stu Macher, Tatum, Randy, this is a great group of characters, and they work really well off of each other. And even though I've seen the movie a bunch of times, I still like how this movie plays with your expectations on who the killer is going to be in this movie. You're led to believe it's Billy Loomis because of Sidney getting attacked in her home, and then Billy shows up at her window. And then once Billy gets in jail, the killer calls her, and you're like, oh my gosh, maybe that isn't him. And then it's not until the end of the movie when you find out that not only is it Billy Loomis, but he had a partner, Stu Macher. Like I've said, I've seen the film a million times, so I know that twist is coming, but I did rewatch the movie a while back, looking back on a perspective of someone who hasn't seen this movie yet and doesn't know that twist at all. And yeah, that twist is very effective. The way it's shot, the way the music is, the way Stu reacts when he reveals himself, it's a great twist, and it's a twist that, like I said, I've seen the movie before, and it still holds up for me. And the ending at the house with Billy and Stu after they revealed each other is one of my favorite endings of all time, if any movie. Scream is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. Not only is it my favorite in the Scream franchise, it's one of my favorites of all time. And I did pick up the new 4K Steelbook, and the film looks great on 4K. It looks better than the original Blu-ray, and plus that's a nice looking Steelbook. It's a very nice looking Steelbook. If you haven't picked this up yet on 4K, I definitely recommend it. And there's really not much more I can add. The original Scream movie is still a classic horror film to this day for many reasons, and I look forward to watching it every time I get a chance to. So guys, that's my review for the Scream movies. Just like I mentioned earlier, let me know your thoughts and opinions and ranking down in the comments section. And as always guys, thank you again for watching. My next video is going to be a review for the movie The King's Daughter, so look forward to that coming up this week. Again, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to like and share it. Subscribe right here if you haven't already, and until next time guys, take care.